You're listening to episode 224 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the official podcast of the Secular Buddhist Association, a grassroots-driven effort to answer the needs of secular teaching and practice for contemporary society. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the SBA website has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Though the podcast focuses on core practices from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Ian Lawton joins us to speak about his film project, The Dharma Bomb, a documentary film about Irish atheist freethinker Lawrence Carroll, who went on to become one of the first, if not the first, Westerner to become a Buddhist monk. History is written by the victors. That's true within Buddhism, too, and not just the evolutionary path of the early Pali Canon, but even in more recent times. Political agendas worm their way into the Dharma, and as recent research indicates, may be giving credit where credit is not due about being the first Western Buddhist monk. Ian Lawton is a multi-award-winning filmmaker living and working in the Midlands of Ireland. His films have been seen all over the world. You can view his work by visiting reasonablyshorts.com. So, sit back, relax, and have a nice Guinness. Our guest today is Ian Lawton. Ian, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Ted.
Very glad to have you here. And before we go into our topic today, which is a film project that you're working on, I'd like us to ask you about your background. Tell us about that.
My background, well, I find myself right now staring down the barrel of 44 in the in a small town in the Midlands of Catholic Ireland. I'm originally from Dublin, but grew up in Cork. I've had an interest in film from a very, very, very early age. And yeah, I went to college a number of times to study that. And yeah, I've won a few awards here and there, and I'm very bad at sort of self-promotion. So it's tough for me to sort of big up myself here in this kind of capacity. I just do the work that enters my soul, and I need to sort of give it to the world, if you like.
The work that calls to you.
Yeah. So whenever I have a sort of an idea that sort of pushes me in a certain direction, I just go with it and let the idea take me to wherever it wants to go, and I'm just a sort of conduit for that. I started off as an animator when I first graduated college back in the mid-90s. And yeah, I was a working animator for many years. I ended up working as a chef for a while because I have a passion for cooking, so I thought I'd give that a go for a bit when the animation industry hit a bit of a bump here in this country. And I was always kind of making music videos and things like that on the side. And I made a decision about 10 years ago when things weren't going very well in this country and my career was sort of a bit stuttered. I decided to go back to college to earn a degree that I never really got back when I first went to college. And that sort of kick-started the direction I'm in now, about 10 years later. Here I am on the cusp of making my first feature film about this monk that I've discovered. I've kind of skipped over things a little bit there now.
Yeah, before we segue over to Lawrence Carroll, I want you to tell the story about how you yourself first discovered Buddhism and a bit of your background with matters of faith.
Well, growing up in Catholic Ireland, I was born and raised Roman Catholic, baptized, the whole nine yards. Went through well, I won't say typical, but it was a very much an indoctrinized education. Nuns were my first teachers, Catholic nuns, then went on to Christian Brothers. And this was like late 70s, early 80s Ireland. So it was before corporal punishment was banned. It was a hard time, let's say. It was not a pleasant experience. I know a lot of people were abused sexually in these sort of institutions. I luckily wasn't, but I was a victim of definite psychological abuse. It was a tough time till my parents decided to up and leave the area where we were and travel south to Cork. And then things kind of changed there. I mean, still 90% of the schools here in Ireland are led by the church, but their kind of stranglehold is a little less apparent, but it still exists. So I became an atheist. I had my first crisis of faith at 6 years of age. I know kind of atheism has a sort of a bad name these days. You know, this whole new atheism, it's kind of akin to new metal, which was a big thing in the 90s. I mean, where you take something that actually has some worth and then, you know, make it really bad, if you know what I mean. I find it almost uncomfortable nowadays to sort of identify myself as an atheist because of the ridicule and that the likes of Bill Maher or Richard Dawkins are prone to. It's tough to sort of find yourself agreeing with these people, but, you know, you could stop being so mean, you know? Just stop being
the aggression
so mean.
is a bit challenging, yes.
Yeah. So being an atheist these days, but I mean, I've been an atheist my entire life. Like I said, I had my first crisis of faith at age 6, and so I didn't know what the word atheist meant or what it was, obviously, at that age, but I just knew that there was no God. I kind of struggled with the concept of infinity and where was this man in the clouds supposed to be, and under the ground where's hell, you know, all that kind of stuff. And I didn't take any comfort or solace in the stories that I was told or the reassurance that, you know, my mother and my grandmother in particular were trying to instill. I just had too many questions, and they tell me you don't ask questions. And my grandmother taking me down to the priest, and I still had these questions, and he's like, no, you can't have these questions. And I think there's such a profound joy in the answer I don't know to a question.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something we just don't celebrate enough.
Yeah, so I felt I was kind of lied to as a child, where I was just like, why didn't these people have the guts to just say, I don't know, when you're asked a sort of a philosophical question? My child asks me these kind of questions, and I have no problem telling him, I don't know. But isn't it great that we don't know? Let's try and find out. You know what I mean? So I kind of digressed a bit there now. Where am I?
Your introduction to Buddhism came how then?
Well, it was kind of indirect. I mean, I had, even around that age, I had older uncles who were listening to the Beatles, and I became very aware of the Maharaji in India, and then going over to learn how to transcendental meditation, and it sort of entered my consciousness then. I remember I was about 12 or 13 years of age, standing at a bus stop in Cork City, waiting for my bus, and this gentleman started chatting with me, and it turns out he was a Hare Krishna, and I was chatting with him for ages before he revealed by taking off his hat that his head was shaven and that he was a monk, and we were talking about Hare Krishnas. He was asking me about them, and my sort of knowledge of Hare Krishnas at that point was, you know, the Airplane movie. You know, and they were just a joke. There was something to laugh at. And there was a small Hare Krishna community in Cork at the time, and they would take to the streets with their bongos and start chanting. And of course, this was open to ridicule to school children. So when I was talking to this guy at a bus stop, he revealed that he was a monk, and I just couldn't believe it. He was a normal, lovely bloke, and he gave me a copy of the Bhagavad Gita, which I still have all these years later. So that was a kind of introduction to the sort of the spirituality of the East, and that there was something lovely over there. But again, I couldn't get past the G word in these texts, the God word. And that was something that was kind of sullied in me, and it's something I just didn't get. So meditation was a thing I always wanted to learn, and transcendental meditation was my only gateway to this. And I found certain places, like when I moved back to Dublin to go to college, in the early 90s, there was Transcendental Meditation Center down the road from where I lived, and they were charging like an obscene amount of money. And I thought this must be some kind of scam. I thought meditation was a beautiful sort of shared experience, and that, if they were charging money for it, there must be something a bit underhanded. And somehow Vipassana entered my life, and I started to practice it, but I never got really any benefit from it until I quit drinking. That was a big deal for me, to quit drinking. I wouldn't call myself an alcoholic, but it's in my family, and it was something very familiar with me, and I could feel it inside me. And I thought, if I let this go out of hand, I'm in trouble. So I decided to knock it on the head and quit the bottle. And I meditated after that, and it really took to me. I think I must have detoxed myself somehow from quitting alcohol, and my brain sort of relaxed and really took to the meditation practice. And that was then I committed to practicing Vipassana on a daily basis and took it from there. I was sort of on the surface with it because it was changing my life so profoundly. Even on a sort of a physical level, it was lowering my blood pressure. I wasn't using my asthma inhaler. It was changing me physically, and I thought I have a very scientific kind of mind, so I was like, I had to study to find the root of this, and my study sort of brought me to Siddhartha Gautama and what his experience under the Bodhi tree, and I just thought, oh Jesus, have I just become a Buddhist by mistake?
How often is the phrase, "Oh Jesus, I just became a Buddhist," used?
So obviously, being kind of a steadfast atheist, I thought, oh, have I become religious? Something that I was dead fast, had lived my life as an atheist for so long that to enter myself to a religion was something I wasn't going to go down without a fight, if you like.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I studied some more and read the words of the Buddha and read various texts, whether it was online or physically in books. And everything that I read, I was nodding my head and thinking, yes, exactly. It was just every single page was just a new awakening, and I was agreeing. I was never disagreeing. Of course, the interpretation of reincarnation and the interpretation of karma and the sort of supernatural elements, if you broke it down, didn't take it so literally, they could have a bit of value, in sort of a metaphorical kind of way, because these teachers kind of spoke in metaphors. They never really meant anything literally. You were meant to interpret it. And that's what I kind of love about Buddhism, is that how it can be interpreted as it travels, like the different kind of sects between Theravada Buddhism all the way across the Mahayana, and how it differs between each culture that embraces Buddhism seems to incorporate it into their way of thinking somehow. And I think like secular Buddhism here in the West, how it's incorporating these beautiful teachings into their own way of thinking. And that's what I think is lovely about it, is its adaptability.
Because it applies to our human existence. Mm-hmm. So it has this amazing openness that does not require adherence to a particular ideological view, but just the self-evident experience of being human.
Yes. And for years I had, copies of the Tao Te Chi on my bookshelf, right next door to Pale Blue Dot, and the Bhagavad Gita is there,
It's funny you mentioned Pale Blue Dot. My wife and I were just at a presentation by Neil deGrasse Tyson here in Minneapolis, and he quoted from Carl Sagan's Pale Blue Dot, and that was the conclusion of his program. It was several hours long, and just the incredible pictures that he had on the screen. They turned the cameras around when Carl Sagan was alive. He had some pull, and they took a picture, and that was the initial Pale Blue Dot. But even seeing more recent pictures that are as one of the probes is going past Saturn, and again seeing that Pale Blue Dot, and it was just amazing. So I completely resonate with having those books together on the bookshelf. Wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, to me that man was certainly a Buddha. He was certainly had an enlightened mind. I mean, when he makes the observation that we are all star stuff, it really just goes hand in hand with the Buddhist thought.
So in Tell us, how did you first run across Lawrence Carroll, and what made you decide to film a documentary about him?
Well, to be honest with you, what are we now? The 10th of May, 2 days after the 12-month anniversary of me first actually reading about him. I was just browsing the web one evening. I don't know what I was looking for. I think I was just doing some research about Buddhism in Ireland, because I'm in the Midlands of Catholic Ireland, so there's no real sort of Sangha community here at all. I'm really pretty much by myself and on my own. So just doing some research to see if there's different places I could go to and I could visit that weren't too far away from me. So I think the search that I put in was Buddhism and Ireland. And just scrolling through Google, I came across an article on the BBC history website that had the title Lawrence Carroll, the Irish Monk. And I just clicked on that very simply and started reading. And I sat up in my chair because I could not actually believe what I was reading was true. I didn't believe that this was actually happening. The fact that I'm, in my 40s and I'm finding out about this guy now, why wasn't he in my textbooks as a child? There's so many sort of notable historical figures in Irish history, and this guy is completely unknown. And before I even reached the end of the article, I had saw one of the names of one of the professors who made this discovery. And before I even finished reading the article, I was composing an email to him saying, I need to talk to you. This is a movie. I didn't know whether I was going to be writing a screenplay at the time or making a documentary or what it was. I just wanted to make contact with this man and say, this is a movie. Obviously, writing the screenplay for a $350 million movie was not kind of an option. So obviously making a documentary would be a fast track in taking this man to the mainstream.
So tell us the story. Who was he? And in particular, what was the backdrop of his early life?
Okay, well, he was born Lawrence Carroll in a small town in the south of Dublin called Booterstown in the year 1856. Ireland in 1856 wouldn't have been a very pleasant place to live as an Irish native. It was Britain's first colony, so it was under colonialist rule. Catholic Church had a very severe stranglehold on the populace. Human rights were at an all-time low. Catholics struggled to even be educated. I don't know if you've ever heard of hedge schools. These were basically pop-up schools that were in a hedge in a farmland, hiding from the authorities to try and teach their children. It was a kind of a tough period of time. So he was born into this Ireland. He was born right next door to the local Catholic Church. So essentially, this man was born right on the front lines of I can't find the right word there, but he was born right on the front lines, right next door to the local Catholic Church. He was the son of the local greengrocer. So there's not really much else I can tell you about that, other than the fact that he definitely hit the bottle early. He became an alcoholic very quickly in his teens. Booterstown was very close to the port town of Dunleary in South Dublin. And he, obviously, because of the difficulty it was in living in Ireland, he left for Liverpool as a teenager. While in Liverpool, he tried to get a job on the docks, but found that difficult. But he managed to get a job on a ship's pantry because of the fact that his father was the local greengrocer back home. That earned him that kind of knowledge, obviously helping him out, helped him get the job in the ship's pantry. This particular ship was bound for the New World. He ended up, after a many weeks long voyage, in New York City. Now, this would have been the late 1800s, so we're talking a Gangs of New York kind of time, where, New York was still being born, essentially. So he's arriving in there, sort of on the tail end of the mass exodus from the Great Famine in Ireland, where the Irish wouldn't have been that welcome coming in off the boat. So from there, he was homeless, drifter, hobo. He was jumping trains and basically living the life of a beatnik, I guess, making his way across the USA. His knowledge of shipping earned him a job on the fruit ship on Sacramento, the Acme. And that took him north to San Francisco. And again, he kept keeping with the shipping knowledge. He worked the commerce route from San Francisco to Japan. And he worked that trip roughly, I think, 3 times. And on the third trip, he was kicked off the boat for drunken disorderly conduct and left on the beach in Japan, waking up hungover, watching his only connection left with the West disappear into the horizon. And there he was, hungover, homeless, on a beach in Japan, completely, you put yourself in those shoes, that's desperate sort of situation. But somehow he made his way to Burma, traveling all the way down through Southeast Asia. He stuck to the coast, probably because he was able to speak English along the coast. He had many jobs, from sort of stevedore, tally clerk, those kind of things. But it was in Burma he came across a flyer that explained Buddhism, which he read. It obviously resonated with him, because probably the same day he was knocking on the door of the local monastery, and the monks took him in, and he dried out and quit the bottle. And after 5 years as an apprentice, in the year 1900, July of 1900, he was ordained Dhammaloka and was the first white man to do so. And that is really chapter 1 of this story, because it's not the fact that he was the first white man to become a monk. It's what he did as a monk that I think makes this man a legend.
Tell us more about that. What was that next chapter like?
Well, at the time, in 1900, Burma was roughly maybe a decade or so, just maybe 10 or 15 years under the process of colonization by the British. They had already conquered sort of neighboring India, and now they had Burma in their sights. And obviously, Dhammaloka had come from a British colony and knew firsthand what it was like to grow up there. I mean, he hit the bottle and left that place because it was so inhospitable. So he really took umbrage to the fact that the colonialists would soften the blow, essentially, by sending in missionaries first to try and convert the populace to Catholicism, using the King James endorsed version of the Bible, which is essentially how to control people. I find it very difficult talking about this without making a preface first in the fact that I'm not Christian bashing by telling this story. I'm merely speaking the facts as they happened 100 or so years ago. I know that a lot of people take solace in the Bible, and whatever works for you, that's great. So I just want to make sure I'm not rubbing people up the wrong way.
You're recognizing that many traditions, not just Christianity or Buddhism or others, can be used to support political aims.
Exactly,
and goals.
Yeah. So what Dhammaloka did, probably a month after his ordination, was to take out an ad in the main Burmese newspaper. And in this ad, he basically forbade the British for distributing any Christian materials or Bibles or anything of that ilk to the populace of Burma. And he signed this note, the Bishop of Rangoon, by order of the Bishop of Rangoon, Udama. Now, he was not the Bishop of Rangoon. He completely made that up. This sort of gives you an insight into the personality he had, and he was absolutely furious with these people coming in and trying to tread on something that just essentially saved his life. And he felt a solidarity with these people, and he did not want to happen to them what had happened to his Ireland. And so essentially from 1900 to roughly 1911, this man sort of blazed a trail across Southeast Asia. His preaching tours were primarily aimed against the British, so much so he was arrested a number of times. He was tried for sedition, a very major crime at the time, and he was definitely a fly in the sort of invading British's ointment, if you like. He was under constant police surveillance, and ultimately he faked his own death and disappeared, which I think is quite poetic.
And so is that how his presence ended, with faking his own death, and then that's all she wrote? He wrote his own obituary. He was big into writing about himself in the third person and publishing articles about himself that he would sign Captain Daylight as his nom de plume. And that sort of suggests his influences. Captain Daylight was definitely an homage
to the Fenian group back in Ireland. They were called the White Boys, the Buchalíbána in Gaelic. And they were a Fenian group during the Land League who would write letters to landlords saying that they wouldn't get their rent, etc. And they would sign that Captain Daylight, by order of Captain Daylight. So he was definitely influenced by Fenian rebels. Because of his organizational skills, there's thought that he must have picked up or was part of many sort of Woody Guthrie-style unions while in the States, which would sort of suggest why he was so good at his organization and preaching tours that he went upon in Southeast Asia. I mean, he did start the Buddhist Tract Society, which was tracts, as you know, are sort of like newsletters, small little fanzines, if you like, that were distributed around. And he would republish atheist authors like Thomas Paine and other free thinkers. He was big into free thought, which is why obviously he was endeared by Buddhism and by becoming a monk was really took to Buddhism. But the fact that he was so opposed to dogma and such a promoter of free thinking. There was no real word for atheism back then. It was free thinkers was what they were really called. That kind of says a lot about him and his way of thinking and his mission. And not only to spread the Dharma, but to spread the concept of free thought.
So the trailer then says, and by the way, for folks who are listening to this episode, I have embedded the trailer for this film that's under production now in the episode page for this episode. So be sure to take a look if you're just listening to the podcast. Check that out as well. But the trailer says that Lawrence was forgotten. Can you talk a little bit about that and some of the possible conditions of that?
Sure. Well, when you think about it, history books are written by the people who win, essentially. And in this case, it's the British Empire. This is one small man, an ex-alcoholic tramp, standing up to the might of the British Empire. That's bound to fail. So the history was written by the British and conveniently left this man out of it. Any Buddhist studies expert nowadays would say that Charles Allen Bennett was the first white Buddhist monk. And the fact is, it's not true. It was this crazy Irishman a number of years before that. And so he was written out of history, and a polite Englishman was put there in his place and given the sort of the honor, if you like. But it also, I'd say, a contributing factor would have been that Buddhism probably wanted a more acceptable face to the West. It was sort of promoted as a philosophical, scholarly pursuit. And this Alan Bennett, polite Englishman, was very much a gentleman scholar, and he was more of a face for Buddhism to the West than this, a crazy ex-alcoholic loudmouth from Ireland, So there's those kind of two contributing factors that would have caused him to be erased from history. So it's a real injustice, I feel. And I really connected to that injustice in my desire to make this film and let this man's story be told, because the transformational arc from a complete and utter selfish alcoholic bum to standing up to the British Empire, after embracing Buddhism and drying out and just becoming a completely new person, is the most admirable thing I can think of. And to be erased from history for that tenacity, for standing up for what he believed, it's so unfair that he should be forgotten.
So you're early on in this film and the production of it, and I'm wondering, what are you discovering that you didn't know before that you're finding interesting about this?
Oh, there's little bits all the time. He makes me laugh so much. Is that he had a very, very good sense of humor. I mean, there was one thing I read the other day that he put a lot of ads in newspapers that would ridicule the missionaries a lot. They were very much on the front lines of his sites, and he offered 1,500 rupees to anyone who could bring him a virgin mother. Just things like that, just sort of nitpicking at the absurdity of the Bible that they were trying to instill into the public. I mean, there's a fantastic situation that was documented firsthand by an American writer called Henry Frank, who wrote a book that was published in 1910 called A Vagabond Adventures Around the World. And when he was on his travels, actually met Dhammaloka in Nepal, on his way to Chittagong, and they set on a ship together going down the River Ganges, swapping stories and stuff like that. But whilst on the ship, there was a Hindi going around to the passengers handing out Christian literature, and of course made the mistake of handing a flyer to our Dhammaloka, who politely handed it back and began this debate about the value of the Bible. And this poor Hindi was a losing battle. I mean, Dhammaloka, if you think about it, being the first white man to be a Buddhist, he's, like he said himself, he was as rare as Siamese twins in that part. So he drew a lot of attention. He was quite a celebrity. He had quite a following as well because of that. So a big crowd gathered to watch this debate between this poor Hindi and Dhammaloka, and they argued back and forth, and the Hindi was losing so badly, started pretending he couldn't speak English anymore and started speaking in Hindi. And of course, Dhammaloka then continued the debate speaking fluent Hindi. And the poor little Christian ran off, and big applause from the audience. So there's a lot of things like that, little elements of his life that really just endear me to him and really want me to share it with the world,
Wonderful. So when is the anticipated release, understanding it's very early on in the project?
We're right in the pre-production stage. I mean, there's a trailer there that you've mentioned, which has been released, and we're going for a September 2016 release. And it's kind of looking likely. I am going the crowdfunding route, but I'm also open to more traditional funding. What the crowdfunding side of things has really allowed this project is for me to publicize and let the world know that this film is being made. So I'm sort of building up an audience for the film about to be, that's yet to be made. And I'm dying to tell people about this guy, because I think he's so important. Even if the film falls apart and never gets finished, at least this podcast is out there that people can look this guy up and find out more. But, it's really been a mission for me like I said, it was 12 months ago on Friday when I first read about this guy. So a lot has happened in those 12 months. I've met with the professors. I mean, I should really talk about them who discovered this story.
Yeah, please do. Tell us about them a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the film I'm making is as much about them and their detective work as it is about Dhammaloka himself. When you consider that this man was traveling in a time without passports, he was constantly changing his name. So he had many pseudonyms. And for them to sort of piece this man's life together from evidence, and a lot of evidence being destroyed by 2 world wars, etc., that it's really a remarkable achievement that they've managed to put together what they've put together so far. I mean, there's still like 27 years of his life unaccounted for right now that they're still working on. And these 3 people, I'll introduce them to you now, is the first person is Dr. Lawrence Cox from Maynooth, University of Ireland in Maynooth. He was researching a history of Buddhism because he put out a book there last year or the year before called Buddhism and Ireland. And there's a small few pages, maybe 4 or 5 pages about Dhammaloka in that, where he was doing some research and found evidence of, I think it was in the Irish Sunday Independent newspaper from, I think, mid-1900s anyway, where they mentioned the Irish Buddhist. He read the article, it's a very short article, and he read that and thinking it might have been made up, it might have been a bit of fiction, might have been something for column inches. But the Buddhist Tract Society was mentioned in that particular article, and it wasn't until he managed to track down an envelope sent to an address in Canada from Burma with the wax stamp and the franking of the Buddhist Tract Society. This was actual physical evidence that this man existed. Alicia Turner in York University in Toronto, Canada, she had found evidence of a happening in the United States. And it wasn't until Brian Bocking of University College Cork realized that quite independently of each other, these 2 were talking about the same person. He put them together, and the 3 of them since then, I think it was in 2009, they made that discovery, and then in 2010, they published a special edition of Contemporary Buddhism, an interdisciplinary journal, which first published their findings at that point. And it was then that, the evidence of Dhammaloka was compiled and released in that volume, and it's wonderful reading. It's absolutely wonderful reading. And since then, they're now currently working on a proper book of his life story. So hopefully the film I'm making will be a nice companion to that book as well.
Wonderful. For folks who are listening to the podcast, if you're interested in supporting this with crowdfunding, I will be linking directly to the crowdfunding as well as the website, the dharmabomb.eu, on this, as well as Ian's website. Ian, I wanted to ask, is there anything else you'd like the listeners to know?
Well, in terms of the crowdfunding, what I've decided to do in this particular thing, I'll just mention quickly that it's on a new platform called Dana.io, and it's actually the world's first Buddhist crowdfunding platform. So if you're familiar with Kickstarter and Indiegogo, the page should look quite familiar. It's got all the usual suspects in there, T-shirts and things like that, and you can actually be in the movie as an animated character. That's something I didn't actually mention, is that this film will be animated. Not fully animated, but at least a third of it will be animated. Because there's only one actual photograph of this man in existence, I've decided, because of my animation background, instead of dramatic reenactments with actors against a green screen, I'd rather bring this man back to life in a dying art form, which is traditional 2D hand-drawn animation. I'm actually working on a proof of concept trailer of that, so if you check out on the website, that should be up there in the next week or so. But I think what's in other crowdfunding campaigns, for the lowest tier, if you give $1 or €1, they'll say hello to you on Twitter or follow you on Facebook. With mine is that you will get a copy of the movie. No ifs, buts, or maybes. If the lowest amount you contribute, you'll get a copy of the movie. That's a given. So everyone, even if I think €1 translated to dollars, I think it's $1.06 or 7 cents. And you get a full feature-length animated movie in September 2016.
That's a pretty good deal.
yeah, I think so. If everyone listening right now was to give £1, I mean, we'd be in production tomorrow, and we could get this going, get this out to people as soon as possible. I see this. I see this film on up there on Netflix. I want this guy to be part of the public lexicon. I think he's such an admirable character. He's up there with Lenny Bruce or Martin Luther King or any other notable person in history who stood up for what they believed in despite the odds with a passion and a tenacity. Yeah, I really respect the guy, and I want the world to know about him, and that's my mission.
And part of our history as Buddhists, just having that knowledge out there, he's part of our history as well.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think one of the things I said on the website is that he's essentially the missing link in Western Buddhism, and that's quite a cool thing to be, and to be forgotten is such an injustice. And by making this film, I feel like I'm righting a 100-year-old wrong.
Our guest today has been Ian Lawton. Ian can be found on reasonablyshorts.com. And again, I'll be linking to the crowdsourcing and to the link for the Dharmabomb.eu. Thank you, Ian, so much for being here. I've really enjoyed speaking with you.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Ted. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the SBA website at secularbuddhism.org, and you'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. Discussion about this episode can be found on the episode page itself, along with show notes. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizen Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are linked on the SBA site on the About Podcast Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.